Most people think the dangerous part of retirement is retirement itself. It isn't. The most dangerous financial years are often the ones right before it, when everything still looks fine. The paycheck is still coming in. The title still sounds solid. The house still signals stability. The accounts may even look bigger than they've ever looked. From the outside, this is supposed to be the victory lap. The final stretch. The season when decades of discipline begin to pay off. But this is also the moment when people make some of their most expensive mistakes. Not because they suddenly become reckless. Because the system around them changes, and most people don't realize it has changed. That's the hidden part. For most of adult life, the financial game feels simple, even if it's stressful. Earn. Save. Keep going. If you do well, if you avoid catastrophe, if you steadily contribute, then the future should take care of itself. And for a long time, that story mostly works. But somewhere in the last 5 to 10 years before retirement, the rules start shifting beneath people's feet. Quietly. Almost invisibly. The things that used to help can start hurting. The instincts that once protected you can begin sabotaging you. The very habits that built your working life can become dangerous in a life that is about to stop being funded by work. And that is where many people get caught. Not in some dramatic collapse. In a transition they misread. The first trap is this: people think they are approaching safety when they are actually approaching sensitivity. That difference matters more than almost anything. At 35, a bad market year is unpleasant. At 60, a bad market year can become structural. At 40, a spending mistake can be corrected with more years of earning. At 63, the same mistake has fewer years to recover, fewer raises to lean on, fewer chances to outwork the damage. The system becomes less forgiving right when many people start feeling most entitled to relax. That's not a moral judgment. It's just what happens when time gets shorter and balances get larger. Every decision carries more weight because the cushion for error has shrunk. And yet the emotional experience of late career life often pushes people in the opposite direction. They are tired. That matters more than financial advice usually admits. People in their late 50s and early 60s are often managing a very specific kind of exhaustion. Not just from work, but from decades of being needed. By employers. By children. By aging parents. By bills. By routines. By a life they built one obligation at a time. When people are tired, they want relief. And relief is expensive. That is one of the invisible systems driving late-stage money mistakes. People don't just spend because they're irrational. They spend because they've been carrying pressure for so long that spending starts to feel like compensation. The nicer car. The long-delayed renovation. The trips. The support for adult children. The extra generosity. The idea that after decades of restraint, they've earned the right to loosen the rules. Emotionally, that makes perfect sense. Mathematically, it can be devastating. Because the years before retirement are not just the final years of earning. They are often the last years when mistakes are still reversible. That's why these years are so dangerous. People experience them as reward years, but financially they are calibration years. This is the period when your life is quietly revealing what retirement will actually cost, not what you hope it will cost. And a lot of people don't want that information. They'd rather preserve the story. The story says, "We did well, we worked hard, we're almost there." The hidden reality is often more fragile. The savings may look decent, but the lifestyle sitting on top of those savings may be far more expensive than it appears. The house may be mostly paid off, but maintenance, taxes, insurance, and upgrades keep turning homeownership into a recurring invoice. The retirement accounts may be larger than ever, but so is the emotional temptation to believe those numbers are permanent, accessible, and more generous than they really are. This is where another invisible shift happens. For most of your working life, accumulation hides a lot of sins. As long as money keeps flowing in, people can postpone clarity. They can avoid doing the real math. They can tell themselves they'll tighten later. They can carry bloated spending because the next paycheck can absorb it. They can leave inefficiencies untouched because income acts like a shock absorber. But right before retirement, income is no longer the permanent rescue vehicle it once was. It is preparing to disappear, shrink, or become optional at precisely the moment people have built their lives around it feeling normal. And that is the real danger. Not that people haven't saved anything. That many people have saved something, sometimes even a lot, but still built a life that requires too much maintenance. A life with a high burn rate is dangerous at any age. Right before retirement, it becomes radioactive. Because retirement is not destroyed only by low savings. It is destroyed by mismatch. A mismatch between the life someone has normalized and the cash flow that life can actually sustain once the salary is gone. That mismatch hides well in high-earning households. A couple may feel responsible, successful, even conservative, because they contributed to retirement accounts, kept their jobs, avoided extreme behavior. But if their daily life depends on a level of monthly spending that only makes sense while full salaries are active, then retirement is not waiting for them as freedom. It is waiting as exposure. And the system does not announce this brutally. It reveals it in fragments. A person notices they feel nervous when markets dip. They realize they're reluctant to retire even though they say they want to. They delay running projections because the answers might disturb the life they've built. They tell themselves they'll work just a few more years, not always because they love working, but because more time feels easier than more honesty. That is how people drift into the most dangerous financial years of their lives while still looking outwardly secure. Then there's the institutional side of this, which almost nobody talks about clearly enough. Entire industries benefit from keeping pre-retirees emotionally foggy. Not necessarily through conspiracy. Through incentive. Workplaces benefit when people stay employed longer, keep performing, keep postponing difficult questions. Consumer culture benefits when older adults keep spending as if identity still needs to be displayed through consumption. Financial marketing benefits when people reduce retirement to account balances and ignore behavior, taxes, spending structure, sequence risk, healthcare costs, and the emotional difficulty of no longer having a paycheck. Everyone is happy to let you feel wealthy on paper. Fewer people are interested in whether your life is actually resilient. That distinction is everything. Because paper wealth can create false confidence. People look at a large retirement balance and feel safe, but the balance is only one piece of a much colder system. What matters is not just how much you have. It's how the money is held, when it will be used, what taxes will hit it, what spending your life demands, how markets behave in the early retirement years, how long you live, and what shocks show up while your income engine is slowing down. This is why the years before retirement punish fantasy. You can no longer think in headlines. You have to think in structure. And structure is where many big mistakes live. One of the most common is assuming that risk becomes the problem only after retirement begins. In reality, the years just before retirement can be uniquely exposed to risk because the portfolio is large enough to suffer meaningful damage, but the person is psychologically tired enough to make reactive decisions. A steep downturn late in the game doesn't just hit a balance sheet. It hits identity. It hits confidence. It hits timing. Suddenly, people who thought they were almost done feel forced to work longer, spend less, or take action from fear. Fear is costly. Especially when there is a lot at stake and not much time. And fear before retirement doesn't always lead people to do the obviously foolish thing. Sometimes it leads them to do what feels prudent, but at the wrong time and for the wrong reason. They panic out of markets after losses. Or they swing too aggressively into risk because they feel behind. Or they hold far too much cash because cash feels psychologically safe, even if it slowly undermines long-term security. The danger is not just volatility. It is the emotional interpretation of volatility by someone whose timeline has become intensely personal. That's why these years require a different kind of intelligence. Not more information. Better emotional calibration. But money mistakes before retirement are not only about markets. In many cases, the bigger danger is lifestyle inertia. People reach their late 50s with spending habits designed for peak earning years and never fully interrogate them. They assume the big things are handled. Maybe the mortgage is smaller. Maybe debts are manageable. Maybe there's a decent nest egg. So they focus on broad reassurance instead of ruthless detail. But retirement doesn't care about broad reassurance. It cares about recurring outflow. How much does your life cost without the flattering story around it? That is the question many people avoid. They don't want to know how much of their current life is still being subsidized by active labor. They don't want to notice how many subscriptions, habits, family obligations, vehicles, travel patterns, insurance layers, home expenses, and convenience costs have hardened into normal life. They don't want to admit that what feels modest now may feel suffocating when every dollar starts coming from a pool that no longer refills through work. So they keep the old machine running. And then they retire into a system that quietly punishes them. Because retirement is not one decision. It is a change in financial physics. During working years, income covers mistakes quickly. In retirement, mistakes compound differently. A bad spending pattern can quietly drain the portfolio. A few generous choices toward adult children can have outsized impact. Large one-time purchases made in the emotional haze of "we finally made it" can permanently reduce flexibility. And once money leaves the system in those early years, it's not just gone. It is gone with all the future growth it might have produced. That's why the most dangerous years before retirement are often the years of false arrival. The years when people feel close enough to the finish line to reward themselves, but not close enough to fully grasp what the next phase will demand. Then there's another hidden system, maybe the most uncomfortable one of all: identity collapse. A lot of financial mistakes before retirement are not caused by greed or ignorance. They are caused by the fact that work has been doing far more than funding life. Work has been organizing identity. It tells people who they are. It tells them when to wake up. It gives them social relevance, status, and routine. It provides a reason to be needed. So as retirement approaches, people don't just face numbers. They face a threat to structure. And when people feel identity destabilizing, they often medicate with money. They upgrade the house they plan to enjoy more. They spend to create a sense of momentum. They overhelp family members because usefulness feels safer than emptiness. They make emotional purchases disguised as practical ones. They imagine a more luxurious retirement not because they've calculated it, but because the image helps soothe the fear of becoming less important.
Again, this is not stupidity. It is compensation.
But compensation is one of the most expensive forces in personal finance because it doesn't feel indulgent when you're inside it.
It feels deserved, mature, reasonable, even noble.
And so the system stays hidden. People say they are planning for retirement while actually spending to avoid confronting what retirement means. That's why some of the biggest money mistakes before retirement happen among people who have been responsible for decades. They are used to feeling competent. They do not expect to be vulnerable to emotional distortion now. But this phase of life distorts in subtler ways. It rewards vagueness. It invites people to confuse proximity with preparedness. Close to retirement is not the same as ready for retirement. A large account is not the same as a sustainable plan. A paid-off house is not the same as cash flow. A good income history is not the same as future flexibility. And perhaps most dangerous of all, a strong public image is not the same as private resilience. Many Americans make their biggest money mistakes before retirement because this is the age when social appearance and financial reality can drift furthest apart. Outwardly, a person may look established. Inwardly, they may be carrying far more uncertainty than anyone around them knows. That uncertainty can drive all kinds of behavior: overwork, overspending, delayed retirement, aggressive investing, timid investing, avoidance, magical thinking. What looks like indecision is often unprocessed fear. And fear thrives in complexity. By the time people reach this phase, their financial life is rarely simple. There are retirement accounts, taxable accounts, maybe a pension, maybe not, social security timing questions, healthcare uncertainty, home decisions, adult children, aging parents, tax exposure, legacy concerns, long-term care anxiety. The complexity itself becomes a form of sedation. People tell themselves the situation is too layered to fully understand, so they settle for vague optimism. Vague optimism is one of the most dangerous assets in the years before retirement. Because it feels better than clarity, right up until clarity is forced on you. Usually by a market event, a health event, a job event, or a simple moment of private honesty. That's when people finally see it. The danger was never just running out of money. It was entering a high-consequence phase of life with a low-resolution understanding of their own system. And once you see that, a lot of conventional advice starts to look shallow. Max your contributions.
Fine.
Reduce debt.
Fine. Diversify. Fine.
But beneath all of that is a more serious question. Have you built a life that can survive the end of your paycheck without turning your later years into a prolonged negotiation with fear? That is the real threshold. Because the years before retirement are dangerous precisely because they are the last years when self-deception can still masquerade as momentum.
You are still employed, still earning, still performing,
still socially legible as successful. That makes it very easy to postpone the deeper reckoning. But the reckoning is coming either way. And the people who navigate this phase will usually do something rare. They stop treating retirement as a date and start treating it as a systems test. They ask uncomfortable questions early enough for the answers to matter. Not how much do I have? But what kind of life have I built around needing income? Not can I retire next year? But what happens if work leaves me before I choose to leave it? Not what do I want retirement to look like? But what am I still funding out of fatigue, image, guilt, or habit? That level of honesty is powerful because it reveals the hidden mechanism underneath so many late-stage mistakes. People are often trying to preserve a version of life that was only sustainable under working conditions. Once you understand that, the goal becomes clearer. The years right before retirement are not for proving success. They are for reducing fragility. For shrinking the gap between what your life costs and what your future can reliably support. For disentangling identity from income before the system does it for you. For recognizing that the biggest threat is not always a crash, a recession, or a bad headline. Sometimes the biggest threat is a life that became expensive by inches, while you were too busy earning to notice. And that is why these years matter so much. Not because they are doomed. Because they are revealing. They show whether decades of effort actually created freedom, or just created a very polished dependency on continued work. That is the uncomfortable truth hiding behind the last stretch before retirement. For some people, it becomes the beginning of real clarity. For others, it becomes the final season of denial. And the difference between those two paths is not luck. It is whether they are willing to see that the most dangerous financial years were never dangerous because retirement was near. They were dangerous because the illusion of safety was.